My name is Marissa Quinn, and at 39, my body began to fall apart in ways no doctor could explain. For nearly a year, I lived with searing pelvic pain, recurring infections, burning urination, low-grade fevers that never seemed to end, symptoms that slowly drained the life out of me. My husband, Dr. Graham Quinn, a well-known
Let me be clear.
urologist, kept
We are
insisting
past the
it was
point of
just
negotiation.
stress,
You will
perimenopause,
comply with the terms we
overwork.
discussed
He
earlier.
handed me antibiotics, painkillers, and told me to stop Googling things. But my instincts were screaming something else. My body wasn't just tired, it was in distress. Everything began to unravel the moment I secretly went to see another specialist. And from that point on, my life veered into a darkness I never imagined possible. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching this story from and hit follow on my channel. We believe life never has just one chapter, and sometimes the most important one begins at the very moment you think you've run out of options. Now, back to the story. On paper, my life in Charlotte, North Carolina, looked solid. I'd been married to Graham Quinn for 14 years. He was a respected urologist with his name on a glass door, Quinn Urology and Pelvic Health, and a row of framed degrees lining the hallway. People in church asked him for advice about kidney stones and prostate meds at the coffee table. Nurses smiled wider when he walked by. And I was fine. HR manager at a mid-sized tech company. The one who remembered birthdays and mediated office squabbles over Slack channels. The one who brought store-bought cookies to potlucks and pretended they were homemade. Then, almost exactly a year ago, my body started to fray in tiny, humiliating ways. At first, it was a dull ache low in my pelvis, like a fist clenching and never fully letting go. I noticed it when I sat too long in my office chair, or when I got out of my car after the commute. Then came the burning when I peed like someone dragged a match down my urethra. I told myself it was just a urinary tract infection, the kind college girls complain about on TikTok. Graham prescribed a short course of antibiotics without even examining me in his office. Classic UTI, honey, he said, leaning against the kitchen counter, tie loosened, looking every bit the tired, brilliant doctor. You've been working non-stop, drinking more coffee than water. Knock back this course, hydrate, you'll be fine. The pills helped, briefly. Then 3 weeks later, the burning came back. This time, there was a sharp stab that radiated down into my groin whenever I coughed or sneezed. Once, in the frozen aisle at Harris Teeter, a sneeze hit and I felt a warm leak in my underwear. My face flamed so hot I thought someone nearby must see steam lifting from my head. I abandoned my cart and went straight home. By month 3, I'd had 3 rounds of antibiotics, 2 urgent care visits when Graham was too slammed to see me at the office, and 1 humiliating incident where I laughed at a co-worker's joke and wet myself enough that I had to tie a sweater around my waist to get to the parking lot. Every time I raised my voice, even slightly, Graham met it with calm, textbook authority. "Babe, this is perimenopause," he'd say, resting a hand on my knee like he was delivering a comforting diagnosis on some health show set. "You're almost 40. Hormones shift, tissue changes, pelvic floor weakens. Plus you've been carrying way too much stress. Bodies don't like that. What about the fevers?" I asked one night, pressing the back of my hand to my own forehead. "I wake up soaked. I can't sleep through the night without peeing at least 3 times. That's not just stress. That could be anything," he replied, kissing my temple. "You need to stop Googling symptoms. You're catastrophizing. Trust the board-certified urologist who lives in your house, okay? Itente. Maulama sannong." His tone was light, but the phrase lodged in my chest. Trust the urologist who lives in your house. On the surface, it was a joke. Underneath, it felt like an instruction. I tried. I really did. I kept swallowing the pills he handed me in those orange bottles with his neat signature on the label. I clung to his reassurances. "Your blood work looks fine. Cultures are clean. It's just your nerves amplifying everything." But there were nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling fan where my heart thundered with a quiet, stubborn rebellion. Something is wrong. I'd shift on the mattress, feeling that familiar pressure low in my pelvis, the sense of something foreign lodged where nothing should be. The thought would flare, then shame would smother it. He's your husband. He's a doctor. If you doubt him, what does that say about you? For the first time in 14 years, I started to feel guilty for thoughts I never spoke aloud. And then, 11 months into the slow collapse of my sanity and bladder, Graham announced he was flying to Las Vegas for a urology conference. 3 days, he said, tossing a suit into the open suitcase on our bed. Keynote, a couple panels. I'll bring you back something from the Bellagio gift shop. Those chocolate-covered almonds you like. His casual promise floated past my ears. Underneath, in a place I had been ignoring for almost a year, something inside me snapped into focus. This is your window. I lay awake that night listening to his breathing. Each inhale and exhale felt like a metronome, ticking down to a decision point. My bladder throbbed, a steady, accusing pulse. For the first time, another sentence cut through the fog. If you keep trusting him, and he's wrong or lying, you're the one who pays the price. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A thin, shaky thread of loyalty gave way to a heavier, more solid instinct. Survival. When Graham's Uber pulled away from the curb the next morning, I didn't go back inside. I sat in my car with my phone in my hand, fingers hovering over the keypad. If I hesitated, I knew I'd talk myself out of it. I typed pelvic floor urologist Winston-Salem female and hit search. That's how I found Dr. Keaton Wells, a subspecialist in female pelvic medicine and reconstructive surgery. His clinic had a different city on the letterhead, a different set of diplomas on the wall. And if I was wrong, and Graham was right, no emotional stake in my marriage. I called. I got a cancellation the next day. And for the first time in almost a year, I deliberately chose not to tell my husband about something happening to my body. Dr. Wells's office in Winston-Salem was bright and quiet, all pale gray walls and soft overhead lighting, instead of the harsh fluorescence I associated with medical spaces. The reception staff spoke in low voices. No one knew I was Dr. Quinn's wife. I was just another woman on the schedule. When he walked in, I noticed right away he was younger than Graham by a few years. Clean-cut, dark blonde hair starting to silver at the temples. His name badge read Keaton Wells, M.D., Female Pelvic Urology. Miss Quinn? He asked, checking his tablet, then looking up at me with steady gray-blue eyes. Marissa, I corrected automatically. My voice sounded thin in the small exam room. Yeah, that's me. He shook my hand. His grip was firm, not overly warm. Professional. I'm Dr. Wells. I've reviewed the intake you filled out, but I'd like to hear it in your own words. What's been going on? I told him. The burning, the urgency, the leaks, the low-grade fevers. The way sex had shifted from something intimate to something I dreaded because it felt like sandpaper and broken glass. The 6 rounds of antibiotics that did nothing. The way my husband, also a urologist, I added, watching his eyebrows flicker, kept calling it perimenopause and stress. Dr. Wells listened without interrupting, thumbs resting lightly on the edge of his tablet, gaze never leaving my face. When I mentioned Graham's name, something in his expression tightened for half a second and then smoothed out. And you've never had any surgeries in the pelvic area? He asked. Bladder sling, prolapse surgery, anything like that? Just an ovarian cyst removal, I said. 7 years ago, at my husband's clinic, he arranged the whole thing. General anesthesia. Other than that, nothing. He nodded slowly. All right, I'm going to do a pelvic exam, then a transvaginal ultrasound and a cystoscopy so I can look inside your bladder. I'll narrate as I go. If anything hurts more than you can tolerate, you tell me and we stop. Okay? Hearing a doctor ask for my consent so plainly made my throat tighten. Okay, I whispered. The exam table crinkled under me as I lay back. The stirrups were cold against my calves. I focused on a small water stain on the ceiling as he gently examined the external tissues, then worked inward. "Any pain here?" he asked. "Yes," I hissed, when his gloved fingers pressed along the front wall of my vagina. A familiar lightning bolt shot through me. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't say, "That's normal," or "You're just tense." He just murmured, "I know, I'm sorry." Almost done, and finished as quickly as he could without rushing. Then came the ultrasound. The lights dimmed. Gel spread cold over my lower abdomen. The wand pressed in. The machine hummed. Shadows flickered on the monitor. I watched his face more than the screen. At first, he wore the same neutral focus I'd seen on dozens of doctors. But as he swept the probe across one angle, then another, something in his jaw locked. A small pulse ticked at his temple. He changed angle, pressed deeper, squinted. "What?" I asked, my heart thudding. "What do you see?" He didn't answer right away. He captured another image, then another. Finally, he set the probe down and wiped the gel from my skin with a towel. "There's something here I don't like," he said quietly. "I'd like to do the cystoscopy right now if you're up for it. It'll give me a clearer look." My palms were slick with sweat. "Is it cancer?" His gaze flicked to mine. "I don't know yet," he said, "and I don't want to scare you with guesses, but I'm seeing changes that don't line up with simple infections or pelvic floor weakness. Let's get more information." The cystoscopy was weirder, more vulnerable. Local anesthetic gel, a narrow flexible scope threaded through my urethra, a burning stretch that made me grip the sides of the table. On the wall, the monitor filled with a pale pink tunnel, glistening with moisture under the cold, white light of the scope. We moved forward, inch by inch, until the view opened into the bladder. "Okay," Dr. Wells murmured. "Here we are." For a second, everything looked vaguely like the medical diagrams I'd seen online. Smoothish tissue, small blood vessels like red threads. Then, along the top, a shadow. Something rigid jutting in at an angle, webbed in scar and angry red tissue. It caught the light and flashed metallic. "What is that?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. He didn't answer immediately. He steadied the scope, zoomed. The screen sharpened, a slender strip of mesh, blackened at the edges, embedded in inflamed tissue like a rusted fence post driven into raw earth. My stomach dropped. "Miss Quinn," he said slowly, "you have a urethral support device in place. It appears to be a urethral lift mesh, model R67B, or a very similar design." My mouth went dry. "No," I said. "No, I don't. I've never had. I would remember if someone put that in me." The scope shifted slightly as my body tensed. He withdrew it gently, then covered me and sat on the stool, rolling closer so we were eye level. "Have you ever signed a consent form for any kind of mesh, sling, or urethral lift device?" he asked. "Any surgery aimed at treating incontinence?" "No," I said, the word scraping my throat. "The only thing, 7 years ago, an ovarian cyst. That's it." He exhaled slowly. "That was when his professional detachment cracked." "Marissa," he said, voice quieter, "R67B devices were subject to an FDA class I recall 3 years ago, highest severity. There were reports of erosion into the urethra and bladder, severe infection, bloodstream sepsis. Many patients required complex reconstructive surgery. They were pulled from the market and all units were supposed to be returned or destroyed." Halang Wanne. The room tipped slightly. "But how is that even possible? Why would I have one?" He shook his head once. "It is physically impossible for this device to end up in your pelvis by accident. It has to be surgically implanted under anesthesia. And based on the scar tissue I'm seeing, it's been in place for years." I stared at him, my heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. "So you're saying someone did this to me," I whispered, "without me knowing, without my consent?" He didn't look away. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly what I'm saying. And that is not just a medical issue. It's potentially a criminal one. in legal terms, what we call medical battery, any procedure done without consent. At this level, with a recall device, we may also be looking at federal tampering statutes. The word felony hung unspoken in the air, but I heard it like a siren. My hand started to shake. Could it have been? Could it have happened during that cyst surgery? 7 years ago? I forced my voice through stiff lips. Graham did that. At his clinic. I was under general anesthesia. Dr. Wales' expression shuttered for a moment, like he was cataloging something he'd already suspected. That's one possibility, he said carefully. We'll need to confirm dates and serial numbers. But right now, my primary concern is your health. The tissue around that mesh is severely inflamed. I suspect erosion grade 3, which is the most advanced category. If we don't remove it, you're at high risk for permanent damage, even bladder perforation. He picked up a pen, wrote quickly on a form, then pushed it toward me. I'm admitting you today to Baptist Medical Center. I'll call ahead and have them page Dr. Olivia Harrington. She's an excellent pelvic reconstructive surgeon. We need to get that device out of you as soon as possible. And Marissa, he paused. For the first time, the calm in his eyes held a flicker of anger, not at me. I'm also strongly advising you to contact law enforcement, he said. This didn't happen by mistake. Someone used your body without your permission. All at once. My world telescoped down to 3 images. The mesh on the screen, rusted and embedded. Graham's face telling me to stop Googling. My own hand, years ago, signing a consent form I never truly read. Leaving the clinic, the sun over the parking lot looked too bright, the air too thin. I sat in my car with the hospital admission form in my lap and tried to imagine any version of reality in which the man I slept next to had not done the unthinkable. My gut, the same gut I'd been told to ignore for a year, whispered the answer I didn't want. He's the only one who could have. The OR at Baptist Medical Center was cold enough that my teeth chattered as they wheeled me under the surgical light. I watched the ceiling panels slide by, heard the soft squeak of wheels, the clink of metal instruments. Everything smelled like antiseptic and faint plastic. A woman with calm brown eyes leaned over me, hair tucked into a blue surgical cap. Dr. Olivia Harrington. Her badge read. Marissa, I'm Dr. Harrington, she said, voice warm but businesslike. We've gone over the plan, but I'll repeat it once more. We're going to remove the mesh we saw on imaging and debride any damaged tissue. I'll take biopsies from the area where the mesh has eroded to rule out or assess any precancerous changes. Do you have any questions before we start? My throat felt dry. Can you fix all of it? I asked. Will I ever be normal again? Her gaze softened. I can't promise perfect, she said. But I can promise you, this mesh will not be inside your body when you wake up. And we'll do everything we can to preserve function and prevent further damage. She squeezed my shoulder. The anesthesiologist adjusted my IV. Deep breaths, someone said. Think of a place you love. 9 taken, Paulasa. For a second, I tried to picture the beach we'd visited on our 5th anniversary. Instead, my mind flashed an image of Graham's office mahogany desk, polished plaque, the framed photo of us in Asheville. Then the world melted. When I surfaced, it was to a foggy, floating sensation and a beeping monitor somewhere near my head. The curtain around my bed glowed faintly with afternoon light. My mouth felt like cotton. Marissa? A voice said softly, can you hear me? I blinked until Dr. Harrington's face swam into focus. She'd changed into teal scrubs. Fine lines bracketed her eyes, deeper now with fatigue. How did it go? I croaked. The surgery went as well as we could hope, she said. We removed the mesh in its entirety. It was an R67B urethral lift device, exactly as Dr. Wells suspected. She turned and picked up a clear plastic specimen container from the bedside tray. Inside, coiled like a dead insect, was a strip of mesh dark, frayed at the edges, flecks of greenish corrosion clinging to it. Seeing it made my stomach roll. This was embedded along the urethral wall and extending toward the bladder neck, she said. The arms had cut into the tissue. There was significant necrosis and scarring. I had to carefully dissect it free to avoid perforation. I also took multiple biopsies from the surrounding tissue. I stared at the evil little relic floating in saline. My voice shook. How long do you think it's been there? Judging by the level of erosion and fibrosis? She exhaled. Years, not months. I'd estimate 6 to 8 at least. 7. My mind supplied. 7 years ago, the ovarian cyst. We sent the device to pathology and our legal team contacted the FDA's device registry to run the serial number. Dr. Harrington continued, setting the container gently back on the tray. We'll have confirmed details soon. For now, you're in the clear in terms of immediate surgical risk. We'll keep you on IV antibiotics, monitor your urine output, and manage your pain. Okay? I nodded weakly. My pelvis felt like it had been scraped with a cheese grater, but under the pain was a strange hollow lightness, as if some invisible weight had been pried loose. When she left, I lay back and stared at the ceiling tiles. Every shift of the IV pole, every beep felt unreal. There was something that had been inside me for years. Something no one told me about. Something my own husband never mentioned, as he pressed pills into my hand and told me to trust him. A few hours later, a woman in a blazer and slacks, a badge clipped to her waistband, stepped into the room. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her expression focused but not unkind. "Miss Quinn?" she said. "I'm Detective Jamila Hodge with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Hospital staff contacted our unit when Dr. Wells reported a suspected case of medical battery involving a recall device. Do you feel up to answering some questions?" My instinct was to say no. I was exhausted, in pain, floating on IV meds. The idea of talking to a detective about my marriage made my stomach twist. But another part of me, the part that had driven to Winston-Salem instead of back into my driveway, knew this conversation was a turning point. "Yes," I said quietly. "I can talk." She pulled a chair up to the bed, took out a small notebook and a digital recorder, and set the recorder between us. "I'm going to record so I don't miss anything," she said. "You can stop at any time." First question. Other than the procedure 7 years ago at Quinn Urology, have you ever been under general anesthesia for any pelvic surgery? "No," I said. "Just that one." She jotted something down. "Can you tell me about that procedure?" "It was an ovarian cyst," I replied. "I'd been having pain. Graham said it would be better to do it at his clinic instead of the hospital. It would be simpler, cheaper. He could oversee everything. He said he'd be there the whole time." And was he? I remembered the mask descending over my face, Graham's face looming above it. "I'll see you on the other side, okay?" he'd said, eyes crinkling. "Yes," I said slowly. He was the last face I saw before I went under. He told me he'd be in the OR the entire time. "Do you remember signing consent forms?" Detective Hodge asked. "Do you recall any language about mesh, sling, or incontinence treatment?" Shame flushed my cheeks. "I signed a stack of papers at the front desk," I said. "He rushed me, said it was all standard stuff. I didn't read every line." Her pen scratched softly against paper. "I've obtained preliminary access to the surgery report from that day," she said. "So far, there's no mention of implanting any device. That alone is concerning. We also have a log from his clinic that tracks medical devices purchased, used, and destroyed. There's an entry for an R67B unit that was marked destroyed about a week before your surgery. But the documentation around that entry looks off." My heart rate monitor beeped faster. "Off how?" I asked. "Different pen, different ink," she said. "The signature doesn't match the others on surrounding entries. The witnessing initials are missing. It looks like someone went back and added a line later." She met my eyes. "Miss Quinn, based on what we know so far, the likeliest window in which that device could have been implanted is during your cyst surgery," she said. That would also explain why your symptoms started 6 to 8 months afterward. That aligns with known timelines for mesh erosion and recurrent infections. I swallowed hard. So, you're saying? I'm saying we have a recalled medical device in your body that you never consented to, she said evenly. We have a log that says that same model was supposedly destroyed at your husband's clinic with suspicious paperwork. We have a single general anesthesia event that lines up with when the device likely went in. Taken together, that's enough to open a criminal investigation. Potential charges could include felony medical battery, assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm, and federal medical device tampering. Possibly more, depending on motive. Motive. The word hung over us like a storm cloud. Up until that moment, some part of me still clung to the possibility of a horrible mistake. A mix-up in tracking, a rogue nurse, bad paperwork. But as Detective Hodge spelled out the pattern, those last threads of denial frayed. A man with access to recalled devices. A man with total control over an OA. A man who kept dismissing my pain as perimenopause. In that moment, I realized something I had been trying not to name. This wasn't just negligence. It was a choice. And the only person who'd had both the opportunity and the authority to make that choice was my husband. 3 days after surgery, discharged with a catheter and a folder of instructions, I should have gone straight home to my couch and my heating pad. Instead, with Detective Hodge's written authorization in my purse, I drove to Quinn Urology and Pelvic Health. The clinic sat in a sleek brick building off a busy road, all reflective windows and manicured shrubs. I'd brought cupcakes to this place for Staff Appreciation Week. I'd sat in the waiting room reading boring magazines while Graham finished charting. Now, walking through the automatic doors, I felt like I was walking into enemy territory. The receptionist glanced up, startled. "Mrs. Quinn, I thought you were in the hospital. Released this morning," I said, forcing my voice steady. Detective Hodge authorized me to retrieve some documents from Graham's office. I handed over the paper. The receptionist read it, her expression tightening, then buzzed the back door open. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and coffee. When I stepped into Graham's private office, the familiarity punched me in the gut. The heavy oak desk, the leather chair, the photo of us in front of a waterfall framed on the wall, his white coat with Graham P. Quinn M.D. embroidered in navy hung on a hook behind the door. I went straight to the built-in safe behind a framed certificate. The combination was our anniversary month and day, a detail that now felt like a bad joke. The lock clicked open. Inside, neatly stacked, were binders and file folders. One thick ledger sat on top, its cover labeled in black marker, Device Log 2014-2021. My hands shook as I set it on the desk and flipped through. Each page listed device names, lot numbers, serials, dates of use, and disposal notes. I scanned down columns until my eyes snagged on a familiar pattern. R67B. Under the date the 14th of July 2017, the entry read R67B, defective destroyed. The signature next to it, in Graham's looping handwriting, looked rushed, darker ink than the entries above and below. No witness initials. My stomach turned. I took out my phone and snapped photos of the page. Then, just to be safe, I photographed every R67B entry in the book. The office door opened behind me with a quiet click. "Marissa?" I turned, heart banging against my ribs, half expecting to see Graham's tall frame filling the doorway. Instead, it was Jenna Myers, one of the clinic nurses. She wore light blue scrubs and white sneakers, blonde hair in a loose ponytail. Normally, she radiated bubbly energy. Today, she looked rattled, color high in her cheeks. Her eyes widened when she saw the open safe. "Miss Quinn," she said, clutching something behind her back. I didn't know you were here." "Dr. Quinn didn't say you." She broke off, biting her lip. My gaze dropped to the object she was trying to hide. a white plastic wand, the kind you only see in one context. A pregnancy test. Something inside my chest went cold. "Jenna," I said quietly. "What's that?" Her fingers tightened around it. "It's nothing," she muttered. "Just personal." She shifted her weight. That's when I saw the ring. A simple gold band with a delicate etched pattern glinting on the ring finger of her right hand. My breath caught. It looked almost exactly like my wedding ring, the one Graham had slid onto my finger 14 years ago under a string of fairy lights and a cheap minister's gaze. "That's a pretty ring," I said, my voice too calm even to my own ears. "Did you pick it out?" She flushed. "It was a gift," she said. "From someone important." Before I could press further, a voice called down the hallway. "Jenna? Hey, sweetheart, you got a minute?" We both turned. A woman in her late 40s shuffled toward us in a floral dress, her belly round with late-term pregnancy. I recognized her vaguely from the time I'd brought lunch to the staff. It was one of Graham's longtime patients. "Hey, Mrs. Calloway," Jenna said quickly, trying to herd her back toward the exam rooms. Mrs. Calloway waved her off and beamed at me instead. "Oh, you must be Dr. Quinn's wife," she said. "I've seen your Christmas cards at the front desk. He's such a good man." The words landed like blows. "Tell him congratulations for me, would you?" She continued, turning back to Jenna with a conspiratorial smile. "On the new house in Concord. And on this little miracle," she said, patting her belly. "At my age, I never thought I'd be doing this again. But he made it happen. Took care of the mortgage paperwork and everything. I don't know what we'd do without him." My ears rang. The hallway tilted. Concord House. The phrase burrowed into my brain like a bullet. Jenna's face had gone papery white. "Mrs. Calloway, let's get you into a room," she said quickly. "We can talk about this later." She managed to steer the woman away. But the damage was done. The tableau burned into my mind. The positive pregnancy test, the ring twin to mine, the casual mention of a house in Concord and little miracle. How many lives was Graham scripting at once? When Jenna returned, she froze in the doorway, caught between running and confessing. "How long?" I asked. My voice was barely above a whisper, but it had an edge I didn't recognize. "How long have you and my husband been sleeping together?" Uncrossed them. Her eyes filled instantly. The pregnancy test trembled in her hand. I'm not supposed to talk to you," she said, words tumbling out. "He said you were sick, that you couldn't handle stress, that you—" "How long?" I repeated, the words sharper. She swallowed. 6 years, she whispered, "on and off. It started when I was 21. He said your marriage was basically over, that you didn't like sex, that you were obsessed with your job, that you didn't want kids. He said he stayed for appearances." Every word was like glass in my ears. I felt my fingers dig into the edge of the desk to keep from swaying. "And the children?" I asked. "Mrs. Calloway mentioned a house in Concord. Is that where you live?" Tears spilled over. Jenna nodded, shoulders curling in. "We have 2, she said, voice breaking. "Leela, she's 4. And Carson, he just turned 2. They think their dad works out of town a lot. He said he would file for divorce when the time was right, that you were too fragile, that you'd break." I stared at her, at the girl who had once cheerfully offered me coffee in this very hallway, at the woman now carrying my husband's 3rd child, wearing a ring that nearly matched my own. "I didn't know he hurt you," she whispered. "I swear, I thought you were sick before. He said you had some kind of congenital issue, that your doctors told you never to get pregnant." I thought. Her voice cracked. She pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth. I had to grab the doorframe to keep from sliding to the floor. My pelvic incision throbbed. The catheter tugged uncomfortably. But the physical pain was background noise compared to the roar in my head. While I bled into pads and curled around heating pads, he'd been starting a second family. He'd been buying houses, paying mortgages, handing out matching rings. He'd been building a life where I was the sick, burdensome ghost in the background. At the far end of the hallway, The security guard's desk phone rang. He picked up, glanced in our direction, then turned slightly away. "Yes, Doctor. Quinn," I heard him say, voice carrying just enough. "She's here, your wife. She went straight into your office. I think she was in the safe. Jenna's with her." My heart stopped. "Shit," I whispered. Jenna sucked in a breath. "He told me to lock everything if you showed up," she said. Her hand fluttered uselessly toward the office. I didn't wait. My fingers flew over my phone screen as I snapped photos of the log pages I'd already seen, then a few more for good measure. The serials, the signatures, everything. When I finished, I looked at Jenna again. Her mascara had smudged under her eyes. She looked very young. "Is it his?" I asked, nodding toward the test in her hand. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "He promised me we'd be a real family," she whispered. "He said once your health declined more, he'd have a reason to finally walk away. He said he was exhausted taking care of you, that you'd never fight him on anything because you depended on him." Her words landed like a match in dry tinder. For the first time, I truly understood. My pain, my humiliation, my dependence weren't unfortunate side effects. They were the point. "I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking. "I didn't know he'd done anything to you. I would never have." The security guard approached, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Quinn," he said stiffly. "Dr. Quinn just called. He said you don't have authorization to remove any documents. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I slipped my phone into my bag. The photos a hot weight against my hip. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm done here." As I stepped out into the July heat, the automatic doors sliding closed behind me, my body felt like it belonged to a stranger, filled with stitches and rage. The parking lot shimmered. In the driver's seat, I called Detective Hodge and told her everything. With every word, Jenna, the kids, the Concord house, the picture sharpened. Motive, pattern, intent. This wasn't just about control. It was about building a new life over my body like it was bedrock. At home, the house felt wrong. The same gray sectional, the same framed wedding photos on the mantel, the same faint citrus scent of the cleaning spray I used every Saturday. But standing there with a catheter bag strapped to my thigh and surgical tape itching under my waistband, all of it felt like a stage set erected around a lie. I went straight to the small office Graham and I shared. His desktop computer hummed softly on the corner desk. He'd always kept it password protected. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Our anniversary? No. Too obvious. His medical license number? Too long. On the third try, my fingers typed 0921, the date of his mother's birthday. The woman he called the only person who truly understands me. The desktop sprang to life. Folders lined the screen with plan names, billing, research, tax docs. One near the bottom stood out, labeled in a font slightly fancier than the rest. Bright Future. My pulse pounded in my ears as I double-clicked. The folder opened into a grid of images. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. There was Graham, in a backyard I didn't recognize, grilling burgers in a t-shirt. In another photo, he stood in a kitchen that wasn't ours, stainless steel appliances gleaming behind him, a little girl with dark curls perched on his hip, kissing his cheek. A blond toddler boy clung to his leg, half laughing. In shot after shot, Jenna appeared in the background or pressed against his side. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper strewn on the floor, birthday cakes with cartoon characters, a front porch with a welcome sign and a house number I didn't know. Each click was a punch. Attached to the photo files were timestamps going back 6 years. I bit down on a choke of air and forced myself to open the subfolder labeled Email Archive. The messages were stored as PDFs, neatly organized by year. I opened one at random, from 3 years ago, from Graham Quinn to Jenna Myers. Subject, overthinking again. Don't worry, baby. I told you I took care of the Marissa situation a long time ago. gave her a permanent gift during that cyst removal. The R67B keeps her weak and dependent. By the time the bigger issues show up, she'll be too exhausted to question anything. On paper, I'm the devoted husband doing everything to help his sick wife. No judge is going to punish me for wanting a little happiness. I read it once, twice. The words blurred, then snapped back into focus, each one etching itself into the inside of my skull. Permanent gift. Ah, 67. B. Weak and dependent. My stomach lurched. I barely made it to the trash can beside the desk before I vomited, bile burning my throat. When the spasms eased, I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and clicked into another email, this one from 18 months ago. Once her bladder really starts acting up, she'll stop fighting me on anything. Surgery, medications, financial decisions, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her. Then when I leave, everyone will see me as the guy who tried for years. No one will blame me. In that moment, I finally understood in words what my body had been screaming all along. It didn't just ignore my pain. He cultivated it. There was a PDF labeled Financial Plan, Quinn Myers. PDF. Inside, tidy rows of numbers. Monthly transfer to Jenna Myers. $2,400. Child support and household expenses. Ye engine, die engine. Mortgage payment on a Concord address under Jenna's name. A $300,000 life insurance policy naming Leila Myers and Carson Myers as beneficiaries. Another document, a Word file titled Exit Plan 2025 DocX, sat like a final nail at the bottom of the list. I opened it. Go. Transition from current marriage to full-time life with Jenna and kids in 2025 with minimal reputational damage. Strategy. Maintain image of devoted husband caring for chronically ill wife. Encourage Marissa to reduce work hours, quit dependency. Control all major medical decision-making. Once her functional status declines further, wheelchair, catheter, initiate separation, citing caregiver burnout, and irreconcilable differences related to chronic illness. Emphasize years of sacrifice. Establish narrative early with friends, colleagues. I love her, but she's not the person she used to be. Outcome. Public sympathy. Preserved assets. Clean start with Jenna and kids. I stared at the lines until they stopped being words and turned into scratches. He'd planned my collapse like a business merger. Calculated the timing of my decay. My hands moved almost on autopilot at that point. I plugged the USB drive into the tower and began copying the Bright Future folder, the emails, the financial PDFs, the exit plan. Progress bars crawled. My heart thudded in my throat. Halfway through the transfer, my phone buzzed on the desk, jolting me. I almost didn't look. The caller ID read, Jamila Hodge. I answered with a voice that barely sounded like mine. Detective, we got the preliminary pathology back, she said. Her tone was gentle, but there was steel under it. The biopsies from your urethral wall show severe chronic inflammation and epithelial changes consistent with high-grade erosion, what they're calling grade 3. There are also cellular atypia changes that put you at elevated risk for future malignancy. In plain terms, if that mesh had stayed where it was for another couple of years, you'd have been facing major reconstructive surgery and a much higher cancer risk. I stared at the glow of the monitor. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. So, he didn't just make me miserable, I said, more to myself than to her. He put me on a conveyor belt towards, what? A slow collapse? Maybe death? I'm sorry, she said quietly. Based on what we're seeing and what you told me at the clinic, I've amended the charges we're recommending to the DA. We're adding assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm and federal medical device tampering. There is more than enough for a warrant. A noise echoed faintly through the house, the garage door rumbling open. My blood ran cold. Detective, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. He's here. I heard her inhale. Do not confront him alone, she said at once. "We received a signed warrant this morning. My team is en route to execute a search and arrest. Can you safely step away from the computer and stay where other officers can see you when we arrive?" My eyes flicked to the progress bar on the screen. 96%. I swallowed. "I'm not leaving without this," I whispered. "But I'll make sure he sees exactly what I've read." End quote. I hung up before she could argue and yanked the USB drive free the second the transfer hit 100%. My heart hammered as I slid it into my pocket. Downstairs, the front door opened. "Honey?" Graham called, his voice floating up the staircase. "I'm home. Flight got in early. I brought you something." The floorboards creaked as he moved down the hall. My hands shook, but an icy calm settled over my chest. I opened the last email I'd read, the one about the permanent gift, and maximized it on the screen. Then I picked up the clear specimen container Dr. Harrington had given me at discharge, the R67B mesh coiled inside like a dead snake. When the office door opened, he stepped in with a cardboard box from my favorite waffle shop, balanced on one hand, tie loosened, a practiced smile on his face. "Thought you could use." He stopped. His gaze took in the scene in a single sweep. Me in his chair, the email glowing on the monitor, the safe ledger still slightly ajar on the chair, the plastic container in my hand. For a heartbeat, his expression was blank. Then color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a curtain rip away. "Marissa," he said slowly. What are you doing at my computer?" I stood up, the catheter line tugged against my thigh, a sharp reminder of everything he'd done. "Reading," I said. My voice sounded almost calm. "About the permanent gift you gave me during surgery. About how you planned to keep me weak and dependent so you could walk away looking like a saint." His gaze started to the screen, then to the container. "That's not," he started, stepping forward so fast the waffle box slid from his hand and thumped onto the carpet. Syrup seeped out, spreading like a dark stain. "You're misunderstanding. Those emails are private." "That's a violation, Marissa. You can't." "I can't?" I let out a brittle laugh. "I can't violate your privacy? You put a recalled medical device in my body without my consent and I'm the one violating boundaries?" "La sa." He flinched, then regrouped, slipping into the smooth tone I'd heard him use on worried patients. "You don't understand the complexity of these things," he said, hands spreading. "The mesh was supposed to help. Your pelvic support was already compromised. I made a judgment call to protect you from future problems. Yes, I maybe didn't explain it fully at the time, but..." I thrust the container toward him. "This," I said, my voice shaking now with rage, "is R67B. It was under a class I recall before you ever stuck it into me. It tore through my tissue, Graham. It almost perforated my bladder. I have grade 3 erosion and cellular changes because of your judgment call. End course." End course. He reached for the container, panic flickering across his face. "Give me that," he snapped. "You shouldn't be handling specimens. It's not sanitary. You've always been fragile about medical stuff. This is exactly why I didn't burden you with..." "Stop." The word came out low and flat. "Do not call me fragile. You spent 7 years making sure I couldn't walk across a room without planning bathroom stops. You did this so I would cling to you and sign whatever you put in front of me. You wrote it down." His eyes flashed. For a second, the mask cracked, revealing something cold and furious underneath. "You have no idea what I've carried for you," he hissed. "Every bill, every emergency, every late-night phone call. You were never cut out for the messy parts of life. All I did was cement what was already true." Footsteps pounded up the stairs. He whipped his head toward the door, just as it burst open. "Dr. Graham Patrick Quinn." Detective Hodges' voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood in the doorway with 2 uniformed officers flanking her, badges visible, faces set. Graham's eyes went wide. "This is my home," he said sharply. "You can't just barge in here like..." "We have a warrant, Dr. Quinn," she said, holding up a folded document. For the search of these premises and for your arrest. Emma, D. She stepped fully into the room, her gaze flicking once to the monitor and the email displayed, then to the container in my hand. Graham Patrick Quinn, she continued, her tone crisp and formal now. You are under arrest for felony medical battery, assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm, tampering with a medical device under federal law, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. He took a step back, hands lifting, eyes darting like a cornered animal. This is insane, he said. You're basing this on the word of a woman who's clearly not emotionally stable. She's been paranoid for months. She's been seeing things that aren't there. My colleagues will tell you. Your colleagues will see the pathology reports, the device serial logs, and the emails you wrote yourself, Hodge said evenly. I'd suggest you exercise that right to remain silent. A small, broken sob sounded behind her. I looked past the officers and saw Jenna standing in the hallway, one hand braced on the wall, mascara streaked. I'll tell you everything, she blurted, stepping into view. He told me she was born unable to have kids, that she'd never know. He said the mesh would help her, that it was a minor thing. I didn't know he'd used something recalled. I didn't know he made her sick. Graham stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Don't say another word, he snapped. Jenna, think about the kids. If I go down, how do you? Her shoulders flinched. Don't you dare put that on me, she whispered. You did this. To both of us. The officer stepped in, turning him toward the desk. Metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. For a second, he twisted to look at me, his eyes searching my face for any softness, any leftover love he could exploit. I can fix this, he said, voice frantic. Marissa, think about everything we've built. I'll get you the best surgeons, the best physical therapists. We can call this a horrible miscalculation. Don't let them. I met his gaze and felt nothing. Or maybe something quieter than rage, heavier than grief. I trusted you with my life, I said. You turned my body into a slow-motion crime scene. We are done, Graham. The words settled in the air between us like a verdict. They led him out, his protest fading down the stairs. Jenna lingered in the doorway, eyes red. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I didn't understand. I thought you were the problem. That's what he told me. How old were you when he started, I asked. 21, she said. He told me he saw potential in me. Her laugh cracked. Guess he wasn't lying. Just about everything else. My Nam. You're not the one who chose the mesh, I said quietly. You're not the one who rearranged our lives like chess pieces. He did that. You and I are both collateral. Tears spilled over again. What am I supposed to tell my kids? She choked. That their dad is a criminal? That he went to prison for hurting you? You tell them the truth, Detective Hodge said gently from behind her. Age appropriate, when they can understand it. And you tell them you did the right thing when you realized what was happening. She touched Jenna's elbow. Come on. We need your statement. When they left, the house fell silent. The only sound was the faint hiss of the air conditioning and the drip of syrup from the smashed waffle box onto the rug. I sank onto the edge of the chair, the specimen container still in my hand. My fingers loosened, and the plastic clicked against the desk. For the first time in years, I let myself really feel what had been swirling in the background all along. Fury, grief, relief, terror. They jostled for space in my chest until they settled into something more solid. Resolve? That night, when the phone rang and the caller ID flashed Keaton Wells, I almost didn't pick up. When I did, his voice was low, careful. Marissa? The hospital told me what happened today. Are you safe? Kanya? Yes, I said. I looked down at the clear container, at the dead relic of the thing that had been inside me. For the first time, it looked smaller. I'm finally safe. The trial started 8 months later. By then, my incision had healed, though the scar tucked when I moved too quickly. I still went to pelvic floor physical therapy twice a week and carried spare underwear in my bag, just in case. The catheter was gone, replaced by timed voiding schedules and Kegel exercises. Emotionally, I was a mess held together with duct tape and stubbornness. I spent months in trauma therapy, learning that what had happened to me had a name: medical abuse, gaslighting, coercive control. I learned that I was far from the only woman who'd been told to stop Googling while something deadly brewed inside her. The courthouse in uptown Charlotte buzzed the morning of the first hearing. News vans lined the street. Reporters lugged cameras through the metal detectors. A local podcast about medical ethics reserved a row in the gallery. Inside the courtroom, under the high ceiling and the North Carolina flag, Graham sat at the defense table in a gray suit, thinner than I'd ever seen him. His hair had gone almost fully silver in under a year. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. I sat behind the prosecutor, hands clasped around a tissue, flanked by Detective Hodge and my therapist. My heart hammered, but my mind was strangely clear. When the judge, Judge Morgan, a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense bob, took the bench, the room quieted instantly. The prosecution called their witnesses one by one. Dr. Wells explained the initial imaging, the cystoscopy, the way the mesh had appeared on the screen embedded, eroding how no such device had ever been documented in my chart. He spoke calmly, laying out the clinical facts. But when the prosecutor asked him how he'd felt personally when he realized what he was seeing, he paused. "I've practiced for 12 years, he said. I've seen complications, bad outcomes, even malpractice. But I've never before suspected intentional harm by a spouse who is also a physician. It still bothers me. A lot." Dr. Harrington took the stand next, describing the surgery in meticulous detail. She held up a blown-up photo of the R67B mesh she'd removed, its edges ragged, tissue clinging to its struts. "This device had been eroding into Miss Quinn's urethra for years," she said. "We classified the damage as erosion grade 3, the most severe. It was a matter of time before it perforated the bladder or caused life-threatening infection. This was not a minor side effect. It was a ticking bomb." An FDA device specialist testified that the serial number on my mesh matched an R67B unit that had been reported destroyed at Quinn Urology. The destruction paperwork, they said, violated multiple protocols: missing signatures, altered dates, lack of witness. A digital forensics expert from the state lab walked the jury through the emails, the financial documents, the exit plan. They explained IP addresses and metadata, how they could prove the files originated from Graham's devices, not fabricated elsewhere. When Jenna took the stand, visibly pregnant again, the courtroom felt like it collectively held its breath. She clutched a tissue, fingers trembling. "He told me she couldn't have kids," she said, her voice breaking. "He said being with me wasn't cheating because their marriage was already dead. When I got pregnant with Leela, he said it was a miracle and that we needed to be discreet, that he didn't want to hurt his sick wife." She wiped her eyes. "I asked him once why he didn't just leave," she continued. "He said, and I'll never forget this, you don't walk away from an investment until you know what you'll lose. He said if he waited until she was more disabled, no court would blame him for leaving. I thought he meant emotionally. I didn't know he was planning to make her that way." Na yitong kung tu. The defense attorney tried to paint her as a bitter mistress trying to save herself, but even under cross-examination, her answers stayed consistent. It was clear she was ashamed, not vengeful. When it was my turn, my legs felt like jelly as I walked to the witness stand. I swore to tell the truth and sat, fingers tightening around the wood of the chair until the grain dug into my palms. "Miss Quinn," the prosecutor said gently, "can you tell the jury what your life was like before you started having symptoms?" I took a breath and began. I told them about the first burning urination, the leaks at work, the antibiotics that never helped. The way Graham's explanations had always sounded so authoritative that I questioned my own perception instead. I told them about the night shots of fever, the way I'd started mapping every public restroom in my head. I described the guilt I felt guilty for doubting him. Guilty for being sick, guilty for being a burden. Then, I told them about the day in Dr. Wells' office when I saw the mesh on the screen, about the surgical lights with Dr. Harrington's face floating above me, about waking up to a coil of rusted metal in a plastic jar. Words spilled out I hadn't planned to say. For years, I blamed myself. I heard myself tell the jury. I thought I was weak, anxious, overdramatic. Every time I said something is wrong, my husband told me it was stress or hormones. He said he knew my body better than any stranger, and I believed him, because that's what you're supposed to do when you marry a doctor. You trust. My voice wavered, then steadied. In that moment, lying in that hospital bed staring at that mesh, I realized the truth. My body had been right all along. He'd turned my own instincts into a weapon against me. And he'd used his degree, his white coat, my love, to make sure I doubted myself instead of him. I spoke about the emails, about reading the phrase permanent gift, about vomiting into the trash can by his desk. I described the exit plan document, the way he'd plotted out my decline. When the defense attorney stood up, his questions probed at my mental health, my tendency to catastrophize, my online research habits. He tried to paint a picture of a hysterical woman twisting medical decisions into a plot. But every time he did, something in me stiffened. For the first time, something shifted inside me. I said when he asked why I didn't trust my husband to manage my care, I realized the most dangerous thing I'd done for 7 years was not question him. By the closing arguments, the narrative was hard to refute. A recalled device, a secret implantation. 7 years of symptoms he minimized. A second family financed in secret. A written plan to leave once I was sufficiently broken. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, my heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my teeth. On the charge of felony medical battery, the foreperson read, "We find the defendant, Graham Patrick Quinn, guilty." On the charge of assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm, guilty. On the charge of tampering with a medical device under federal law, guilty. On the charge of fraud and insurance misrepresentation, guilty. Judge Morgan's face was impassive as she delivered the sentence. "Mr. Quinn," she said, "your actions represent a grotesque abuse of both marital trust and medical authority. You weaponized your expertise against the person you had a duty to protect. For that, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, permanent revocation of your medical license, mandatory listing on the medical abuse registry, and full restitution for Miss Quinn's medical and psychological care." Graham closed his eyes as the words rolled over him. When the bailiff led him away, he didn't look back at me. I watched him disappear behind a side door and felt a strange combination of emptiness and something like lightness. Not joy, not yet, just the absence of the weight I'd been carrying. A year later, I stood in front of a full-length mirror in a simple ivory chiffon dress and barely recognized the woman looking back. I was still me, brown hair, twisted up loosely, faint crow's feet at the corners of my eyes, but the expression was different. Less hunted, more grounded. The scar low on my abdomen peaked just above the top of my shapewear. I reached down and let my fingertips trace it. Once, I'd hated it. Now, it felt like a border between two lives. "Mama?" I turned. In the doorway of the bedroom stood Rosie, 5 years old, curls flattened slightly on one side from her nap, a basket of silk rose petals swinging from her arm. She wore a white dress with a tulle skirt that made her look like a tiny ballerina. "Wow," she breathed, eyes wide. "You look like a princess." My throat tightened. Rosie had come into my life 9 months earlier, a foster care placement from a hospital where Dr. Harrington volunteered. Her mother had overdosed in a motel room. Her father was nowhere. The state had called her hard to place because of her age and trauma history. The first time I saw her, curled on a plastic chair in the hospital hallway, gripping a broken action figure, some cracked part of me recognized something in her eyes, a wary, stubborn spark that had survived neglect. She moved in as a foster child. Within weeks, she'd started calling me Mama in her sleep. Within months, I couldn't imagine the house without her footprints and constant questions. I crouched so we were eye level. "You look pretty incredible yourself," I said, smoothing a stray curl from her forehead. "You ready to be the best flower girl anyone's ever seen?" She nodded vigorously, then reached out and pressed a small hand to my chest. "Is your heart beating fast?" she asked. "Mine is." I laughed softly. "Yeah," I said. "Mine too." Behind her, another figure appeared, Keaton Dr. Wells minus the white coat. He wore a navy suit and no tie, his hair a little messy in a way I'd come to love. He stopped at the threshold, eyes soft when he took me in. "Wow," he said. "Hey there, Miss Quinn." "Last name's still up for discussion," I said, but my cheeks warmed. He stepped in, careful of the trailing dress, and squeezed my hand. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Physically, I mean." "Nervous," I admitted, "but in a good way. The way you feel before a roller coaster you actually want to ride." He smiled. "Your latest labs look excellent," he said, slipping effortlessly into doctor mode for a second. "Inflammation markers down, bladder capacity up. You've put in a lot of work, Marissa. Your body's done a hell of a job healing." DON10P N1010PO DON1010P N1010PO. For the first time in a long time, hearing a doctor talk about my body didn't make me flinch. It made me feel proud. "For the first time," I said slowly, meeting his eyes, "I feel like my body belongs to me again." We walked out together into the backyard of the small craftsman house I'd bought in my own name. No shared mortgage, no hidden second addresses. String lights zigzagged between trees. Friends from work, from therapy, from the support group for survivors of medical abuse, sat on folding chairs on the grass. At the front, under a simple wooden arch draped with greenery, Judge Morgan stood in a blue dress instead of a robe, officiating as a friend, not as the woman who'd sentenced my ex-husband. Rosie took her job seriously, scattering petals in uneven clumps down the aisle, glancing back every few steps to make sure I was still behind her. As I stepped onto the grass, the evening light wrapped everything in a warm, golden haze. The murmur of voices quieted. A breeze stirred the leaves. Somewhere a neighbor's dog barked. I felt every sensation, the slight tug of my scar as I walked, the brush of chiffon against my calves, the pressure of Keaton's arm steady at my side. At the front, he turned to face me. His eyes were bright. "Marissa," he said when it was his turn to speak, "you walked into my clinic terrified and hurting. You had every reason to never trust a doctor again, or a man again, and somehow you've let me be both. I can undo the years you lost. But I promise you this, I will never make decisions about your body without you. I will never ask you to doubt your own instincts. You deserved that kind of respect long before you ever met me. I'm just grateful I get to be here now, giving it to you." Something in my chest cracked open in a way that didn't hurt. When it was my turn, I glanced at Rosie, who sat in the front row swinging her legs, watching me with a seriousness far beyond her years. "I used to think love meant trusting someone more than I trusted myself," I said. "I learned the hard way that's not love, that's surrender. Today, standing here, I know real love feels different. It leaves room for my no. It lets me say, something feels wrong, and be heard. It doesn't require me to get sick or small to be worthy of staying." For the first time, the words felt like they were for me as much as they were for Keaton. We exchanged rings. Rosie clapped so loudly. Judge Morgan laughed. Keaton kissed me. People whooped. Later, after cake and awkward dancing and congratulations, when the guests had gone and Rosie was asleep, I stepped out onto the small back porch alone. The string light still glowed softly. Crickets sang. Somewhere far off, a train horn blew. I wrapped my arms around myself and closed my eyes. For a moment, my mind flickered back to the woman I'd been on that exam table in Winston-Salem, clenching my fists, trying to swallow the urge to apologize for my own pain. To the woman hunched over a trash can in an office, reading emails that turned her life inside out. to the woman on a witness stand, voice shaking but steady. Then my awareness shifted to now, to the quiet house filled with the soft snore of a child down the hall, to the presence of someone who had spent an entire year showing me, in 1,000 tiny ways, that my body and my voice were mine. In that moment, I finally understood something simple and enormous. I had been right. That tight, insistent knot in my gut had been right all along. Trusting it hadn't destroyed my life. Ignoring it had. I took a slow breath and felt it fill all the way down to the place where the mesh had once cut into me. My past was carved into my body in scars and medical records and court transcripts. It would always be there. But it was no longer the only story stamped on my skin. I had a new one now. Survival, justice, and the quiet, radical act of choosing to believe myself. The porch light cast a soft halo on the wooden boards. Somewhere inside, Rosie shifted and murmured in her sleep. Keaton's footsteps moved down the hallway. The night felt impossibly ordinary, and, because of that, miraculous. Life had been brutal. It had also, in its own crooked way, given me a second chance. Not the one I'd planned, but one I'd fought like hell to claim. The betrayal hadn't been the end. It had been the fault line where I finally stopped abandoning myself, and standing there, bare feet on warm wood, air humming with summer, I knew one thing with a clarity that would never leave me. After everything, the sun really does rise again. Or I could believe the doctor whose face actually showed concern when he looked at my lab results. I chose to believe concern. The prosecutor nodded, then asked me to describe the day I opened the new Roots folder. I did, in as much detail as I could manage without my voice breaking completely. The Disneyland photos, the mortgage papers, the emails about my gland being toast. How did reading those messages make you feel? She asked softly. It felt like someone reached into my chest and turned off a light, I said. Not just the light for my marriage, the light for every truth I thought my life was built on. I paused, breathing through the ache behind my sternum. He wasn't just neglecting me, I added. He was strategizing my decay. The defense attorney tried to rattle me, suggesting that I had resented Liam's success, that I might be exaggerating the pain to punish him. Miss Ward, he said, is it possible you're misinterpreting your husband's dark humor in those emails? Doctors can be graphic when they vent with colleagues. I looked at him, then at the jury. Humor is when you make a joke and everyone can walk away, I said. What he did to me doesn't end when the punchline does. I wake up in it every day. When I stepped down from the stand, my legs were trembling, but I felt lighter in some essential way. I had said it out loud. All of it. Liam chose not to testify. His lawyer said it was to avoid a media circus and respect the scientific complexity of the case. I suspected it was because he knew his arrogance would bleed through, and arrogance doesn't play well in front of a jury you've just scared half to death. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for several hours. I sat in the hallway with Detective Hall and Dr. Cho, sipping lukewarm coffee from a vending machine, staring at the scuffed tiles. Every time the door to the jury room opened, my heart shot into my throat. Finally, the bailiff called us back in. As we stood, my knees felt weak. I caught Dr. Cho's eye. He gave me a small nod, the kind that said, "Whatever happens, you're not alone in that chair anymore." The jury filed back in. The foreperson, a middle-aged man in a plaid shirt holding a folded piece of paper. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Doyle asked. "We have, Your Honor," he said, "on the count of aggravated assault causing serious bodily injury. How do you find the defendant?" "Guilty," he read. My lungs released a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "On the count of unlawful human experimentation without consent?" "Guilty." "On the count of tampering with medical products with reckless disregard for human life?" "Guilty." "Da kaina ka. Mang ka. Da ka." Each word landed like a gavel, even before the judge spoke again. She called Liam to stand, though he barely lifted his gaze from the table. "Dr. Ward, Judge Doyle said. You violated not only the law, but the most basic trust a patient and a spouse can place in another human being. You weaponized your knowledge and your marriage. This court cannot and will not minimize that. She sentenced him to 6 years in state prison. She permanently revoked his license to practice medicine in Arizona and reported the case to the national database so he couldn't simply move and start over. She ordered him to pay damages and to assume lifelong financial responsibility for my ongoing hormone replacement therapy and any related cardiac care. His lawyer murmured about appeals, about misinterpretation of complex research, but even they seemed hollow now. When the bailiff led Liam away in handcuffs, he didn't look at me. I watched his back as he disappeared through the side door. A man who once thought he could orchestrate everyone's ending, now having his own written for him. I felt no satisfaction in that moment, just a quiet, exhausted kind of justice. A year later, I barely recognized my life. My body still bore the permanent marks of what Liam had done. Every morning, I lined up my thyroid pill next to my coffee mug, swallowing it 30 minutes before breakfast like clockwork. My heart still skipped sometimes in ways that made me sit down and breathe. But the constant bone-deep fatigue had eased, thanks to proper treatment. My thoughts were clearer. The world had color again. I no longer lived in the house Liam had once filled with lies. I'd sold it, with the court's blessing, and moved into a smaller place on a quiet street with a big maple tree in the yard. The first night I slept there, the silence felt different, like a blank page instead of a cover-up. Dr. Joe Adrian, as I'd learned to call him outside the exam room, remained my endocrinologist. Somewhere along the line, he also became my friend. He checked my labs, adjusted my doses, and texted me stupid memes when court dates loomed. We started grabbing coffee after my appointments, then dinner on nights that were heavy with medical what-ifs. He didn't rush anything. He didn't push. He just showed up, consistently, quietly. One evening, months after the sentencing, we sat on my new couch. A movie paused on the TV because we'd gotten sidetracked talking about childhood memories. I used to think my job was just numbers and hormones, he said, smiling. Now I realize it's half science, half being a witness to people's lives falling apart and coming back together. Which half am I? I asked lightly. He studied me for a second. You, he said, are the part that proves sometimes the coming back together can be beautiful. My chest warmed. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was an obligation or a statistic. It felt like I was a person. Somewhere in that gentle, slow unfolding, we fell in love. Not the dizzy, high-stakes falling I'd felt with Liam in our 20s. This was quieter, steadier, built on all the ways he had sat with me in my worst moments without flinching. Around the same time, I started volunteering with a local organization that supported kids in the foster care system. It began as a way to put my pain somewhere useful. I organized donations, balanced their books, hosted bake sales. One Saturday, they asked for volunteers to hang out at the community center where kids waiting for placement could play games. That's where I met Stella. She was 7, with wild brown curls and eyes too old for her small face. She sat off to the side, coloring furiously, while other kids played ping pong or video games. I sat down a few feet away. "What you drawing?" I asked softly. Without looking up, she shrugged. "Trees. Those are pretty good trees," I said. "Mine always look like green lollipops." That earned me a tiny snort. We started talking about her favorite books, about how she hated when people talked to her in baby voices, about how she'd been in 3 different placements in 2 years. "They always say it's not my fault," she said, pressing hard enough with the crayon to almost rip the paper. "But I'm the one who keeps leaving." Her words landed deep. I remembered how it felt to have your whole life yanked out from under you and be told it was for the best. "Stella," I said gently, "the grown-ups messed up, not you." She shrugged, eyes still on the page. You don't know that, she said. In that moment, I realized I wanted to show her proof to her, with more than words, that some people stayed. The process of becoming her foster parent, then her adoptive mother, wasn't quick or simple. There were home studies, classes, interviews. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I was strong enough to be someone's safe place while I was still rebuilding my own. But the first time she slipped her small hand into mine during a court hearing, leaning her head against my arm as if it was the most natural thing in the world, something in me clicked into place. Motherhood hadn't come the way I'd pictured it. My body hadn't carried Stella, but my heart had been waiting for her longer than I knew. Mom, she said one night, quietly testing the word in the dark hallway. I swallowed hard. Yeah, sweetheart, I answered, flicking on the bathroom light for her. She smiled, a small, fierce thing, and for the first time, there was no doubt in her eyes about whether I'd still be there when she came back. On the day Adrian and I got married, the Arizona sky was clear and bright, the kind of blue that makes everything else look sharper. I stood in front of a full-length mirror in a simple ivory dress, my thyroid scar a faint line on my throat. My body was a map of everything I'd survived, and for once, I didn't feel the urge to hide any of it. Adrian stood behind me, straightening his tie, catching my reflection's eye. Your labs looked perfect last week, he said. Half doctor, half fiancé. TSH right in the sweet spot. I'm fully authorized to say you are medically cleared to dance tonight. I laughed, the sound surprising me with how light it was. In that moment, I realized that being seen, truly seen, is the best medicine there is. There was a knock at the dressing room door. Can I come in now? A small voice called. Get in here, kiddo, Adrian said. Opening the door, Stella barreled in, wearing a white dress with a ribbon sash, a basket of white rose petals hanging from one arm. Her curls had been tamed into something resembling order, but a few rebellious strands still framed her face. Mommy, she gasped, seeing me. You look like a princess, but also like you. Does that make sense? It's perfect sense, I said, kneeling down to her level. She touched the fabric of my dress with reverent fingers, then looked up at Adrian. Adrian, she said, still insisting on his first name most days. Are you ready? The lady said, it's almost our turn. I'm ready if you are, he said, offering us both an arm. We walked down the short hallway together, me, my daughter, and the man who'd first met me as a patient and chosen over and over to also see me as a whole person. The ceremony was small. A few close friends, some co-workers from the credit union, the director from the foster agency, dabbing her eyes in the second row. Detective Hall sat quietly in the back. Our eyes met for a second, and she gave me a little nod. She'd once told me that most of her cases ended in paperwork, not weddings. As we reached the end of the aisle, Stella stepped ahead of us, scattering petals with great concentration. The sunlight streamed through the windows, catching in the floating white edges. Adrian squeezed my hand. You okay? He whispered. I looked at the rows of chairs, at the simple arch with a few strands of greenery, at my daughter's small, determined back. I thought about the woman I'd been a year and a half ago, cold all the time, exhausted, believing that sickness and confusion were just my new normal. I thought about the night I sat alone in our old kitchen, heart pounding, and decided to pick up the phone and call another doctor. The moment I opened Liam's computer, the click of the USB drive, the feel of the specimen container in my hand, I thought about hospital ceilings and courtroom benches, about every time I'd felt like my body was a problem and my voice an inconvenience. Then I looked at the man beside me, the girl in front of me, and the life I was walking into. I'm more than okay, I said softly. For the first time, I actually feel safe. The officiant spoke words I barely heard. Vows were exchanged, simple ones, about showing up, about telling the truth even when it was hard, about never using the language of care to mask control. When Adrian slipped the ring onto my finger, his hands were steady. For the first time, I realized I understood that love isn't the absence of fear. It's the presence of someone who stands there with you, even when fear walks in. 19 Taik. After the ceremony, while our small group of guests moved toward the reception area, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The air smelled like pine and faintly of the catered tacos someone was setting up. I stood under the big maple tree, feeling the rough bark at my back, listening to the distant murmur of voices and Stella's laughter. In front of me, life stretched out: routine blood tests, school drop-offs, arguments over bedtime, mortgage payments. Nothing glamorous, nothing cinematic, but deeply, profoundly mine. I thought about Liam, somewhere in a cell, likely already spinning a version of events that made him the misunderstood genius and me the ungrateful wife. Once, that thought would have consumed me. I would have spiraled, imagining how he was telling the story, wondering if people believed him. Now, it felt distant. He could tell whatever story he wanted. I knew the truth. And more importantly, I was living it. I ran my fingers over the faint scar on my neck, feeling the slight ridge of tissue. This body had been tampered with and underestimated. It had also carried me through hell and out the other side. A small hand slipped into mine. "Mom?" Stella said, leaning against my hip. "Are you sad?" Unquote. I looked down at her, at the worry in her eyes. "No," I said honestly. "I'm just remembering. Sometimes the memories hurt, even when you're really happy." She nodded, as if she understood more than any 7-year-old should. "I remember my old house sometimes," she said, "the bad stuff, but also the good stuff, like the way the light came through my bedroom window." "Is that weird?" "No," I said. "That's just being human." She thought about that, then smiled. "Well," she said, "this house, you and Adrian and me, that's my favorite one." Something inside me melted in the best way. I squeezed her hand. "The greatest act of love," I thought, "is the fierce protection of your own truth and of the people you bring into it." I'd lost a husband, a home, and the life I thought was waiting for me. I'd gained a scar, a pill bottle, and a file full of court documents. But I'd also found something I hadn't even realized I'd lost years ago: my own voice, my own intuition, a man who respected both, and a little girl who called me Mom in a tone that left no room for doubt. The sun dipped a little lower. Inside, someone turned up the music. I heard Adrian call my name. "Come on, sweetheart," I said to Stella. "They're not allowed to start the party without us." And the correct tick by. We walked back inside together, hand in hand. Petals from her basket still caught in the folds of her dress and in the lines of my palm. Life can be brutal. It can strip you down to the rawest version of yourself. But if there's one thing my thyroid, my heart, and my entire messy journey have taught me, it's this: even after someone you love tries to extinguish your light, you can still rebuild the fire. You can still listen to that small, stubborn voice inside that says, "This is wrong. Get out." You can still stand up in front of strangers and say, "This happened, and it wasn't okay. Yeah, get a run. Get a run." And if you keep moving forward, even one shivering, hormone-wrecked step at a time, the sun does come up again. Sometimes it rises over a courthouse. Sometimes over a small rental with a maple tree. And sometimes, like today, it rises over a room full of people who know your scars and choose you anyway. That, more than any verdict, is my justice.